Have you ever noticed that when people argue, they rarely say, I just don't like what you did? Instead, they say things like, you promised. That's not fair. You wouldn't like it if someone did that to you. What's interesting is that when we argue, we're usually appealing to some standard of behavior that we expect the other person to recognize. This observation is where C.S. Lewis begins his famous book, Mere Christianity. Now, Lewis isn't trying to prove Christianity yet. In fact, he spends most of Book 1 making a much smaller claim. His goal is to show that there is a real moral law, and that this moral law points to something beyond the physical universe. Let's walk through his reasoning. First, Lewis asks us to consider the difference between physical laws and moral laws. A law of nature describes what things do. For example, gravity causes objects to fall toward the earth. A rock can't choose to ignore gravity. But moral laws are different. When we say, you should tell the truth or you shouldn't steal, we're describing how people ought to behave. The strange thing is that people can break moral laws. You can lie. You can steal. You can act selfishly. The fact that we can break moral laws shows they're different from laws of nature. Lewis calls this moral standard the law of human nature. But where does it come from? One popular answer is that morality is just something societies invented. Lewis agrees that cultures differ in some ways, but he points out that almost every society throughout history has valued things like courage, honesty, justice, and keeping promises. You can find differences in customs. But it's much harder to find a culture that praises cowardice, celebrates betrayal, or admires selfishness as an ideal. This suggests that morality isn't completely invented. Another explanation is that morality comes from instinct. Lewis doesn't deny that humans have instincts. We have instincts to protect ourselves. We have instincts to help others. We have instincts to seek food, comfort, and safety. But Lewis argues that morality can't simply be one instinct among many. Imagine you see someone drowning. One instinct tells you to help. Another instinct tells you to stay safe. Which instinct should you follow? Lewis argues that the moral law acts like a judge between instincts. It tells you which instinct deserves priority in that moment. In one of his most famous illustrations, Lewis compares our instincts to piano keys. The keys themselves aren't bad, but to create music, the keys must be played in the right order. Likewise, morality isn't about eliminating instincts. It's about arranging them properly. Next, Lewis examines the idea that morality exists only because it helps humanity survive. He agrees that many moral behaviors benefit society. But he asks an important question. Why should we care about the survival of society in the first place? If helping humanity survive is good, then we've already smuggled in a moral judgment. We've assumed that survival is something we ought to pursue. The question remains, where does that ought come from? This brings Lewis to what he believes are two remarkable facts about human beings. First, we all seem to know that there is a standard of behavior we should follow. Second, we consistently fail to live up to it. Think about that. Most people don't argue that they are perfectly moral. Instead, they make excuses. I was tired. I didn't mean it. They deserved it. The excuse itself is revealing. When we make excuses, we're admitting there was a standard we failed to meet. Lewis believes these facts point beyond the material world. If the universe is nothing more than matter and energy, then concepts like justice, fairness, and moral obligation become difficult to explain. Why should anything be considered truly right or truly wrong? Instead, Lewis argues that the moral law is evidence of something behind the universe, not merely a force, not merely energy, but something more like a mind. Notice what Lewis has not done. He has not argued for Christianity. He has not argued for Jesus. He has not argued for the Bible. At this stage, Lewis is simply saying that the existence of an objective moral law makes more sense if there is an intelligent source behind reality. In other words, Book 1 of Mere Christianity is not really about Christianity. It's about asking a simple question. Why do human beings know there is a difference between right and wrong? And why does that knowledge seem so difficult to explain if the universe is nothing more than blind matter? Whether you agree with Lewis or not, it's a question that's worth thinking about.